Hey everybody, I'm Keith. Welcome to VTS44. That's right, 4 and 4, 44. 44. That's like 44. Anyways, good to have you guys. We're back at it. I decided to do the little camera bit sitting down today. We're gonna keep it short and sweet because we got lots of content, lots of time for me just doing this thing on a computer. So rather than get all gussied up, we're just gonna get right into it, okay? And yeah, man, let's just hit the ground running, and let's go.
Okay, so we're going to pick this up where we left off. Just to kind of recap real quick, we started off again, well, here, just watch the little clip that we're working from. This will be the third time you've seen it if you've followed along. But for those of you who are new to this is the piece that we've been working on. And what we're going to try and do here is just kind of work with stuff, kind of like you would work with in a film. So here's the clip.
What do you want?
Pretty simple stuff, typical of a scene, but 2-3 seconds long, and it's enough for you to kind of get your feet wet. It's a very simple scene. We're not doing a whole lot physically. The acting's fairly simple. The first month we covered this, that would be VTS42. We were focusing mainly on just the primary poses, the planning and the primary poses, and then VTS43 last month we focused all our time on making one good primary breakdown. And if you want to know more about the breakdowns and how I look at them, primary, secondary, stuff like that, I'll talk more about it as we go through. But the way I look at things, is looking right here, is you have a pose here and a pose here, and you have to get from one to the other. Okay, you need a way to get there. Now the computer, the way it's going to want to do it is a straight line. Okay. So the computer wants to get from pose 1 to pose 2, and if you don't give it anything to work with, it's just going to go straight across, okay? And the shortest distance between 2 points is a straight line. That's what the computer is going to do. Now, let's say these poses are in different positions. Let's say pose 1 is down here, and pose 2 is up here. If you leave your computer in linear, it does this, okay? Fairly straightforward. If you go ahead and throw it in spline, like a lot of people will generally do, it'll look like this. But again, it's just the computer putting on some basic little math here about how it eases in and eases out from these poses. That's okay and well and good, but what if you want something besides that? What if you want to get from pose 1 to pose 2, but instead you want to go this way? Well, now you need to define it. There's this part right here that the computer's not going to give you. It's not going to occur on its own. Now, some people will go ahead and take the curves and they'll pull them all out with the tangent handles and stuff like that. And if that's the way you work, that's great for you. I can't stand working that way because I need to be able to see what my choices are without having to dive around in the spaghetti box. So that's what I spent a lot of time working on last month in getting this good breakdown. So from here to here to here, this is pose 1, this is pose 2. Okay, 1 and 2, and there's the breakdown I was working on. And I wanted to try and get a good under arc. Okay. Go ahead and use a color that we can see. I wanted to get a good under arc, and then at the end it's going to kind of settle down a little bit. Alright? But so we spent all that time building one good breakdown. Why did I spend all that time building one good breakdown? Because it's primary. That's why I call it the primary breakdown. You have to figure out how to get from A to B. Just to do a little more whiteboard time here, if we take a look at this, you can imagine that you have a pose here. Just imagine you have pose 1 and you have pose 2, and let's just imagine that they are like cliffs. Okay, so you got a cliff here, you got a little bit of grass here, alright, and a little grass here. So there we are. We have these nasty jagged cliffs, okay, and the poses stand on one side and the other, and in between are horrible shark infested waters. Okay, you want to get from one pose to the next. Well, how do you get there? Well, if you don't build a breakdown, if you don't build a bridge, you're going to get eaten by the sharks. This is kind of silly, but think about it. If you have to build a bridge from pose 1 to pose 2, so that bridge can go across. Okay, and you can be safe and you don't get eaten up by the surprise of the sharks. Okay, so you go ahead and you build your bridge, And you can get safely from pose 1 to pose 2. Well, that bridge, that right there, is your breakdown. Okay? That's how it works. You have to get from one to the other. And there's no point in trying to figure out the slope of the bridge, no point in figuring out how high the bridge needs to be. You can't figure out this part of the bridge or this part of the bridge until you figure out this part of the bridge. So that's why I build things in these orders. I think in terms of primary breakdowns, which is that big thing in the middle, and then secondary breakdowns, which are these things like eases and maybe a little extra arc fixes. Okay, but as time goes by, you build those in, but you can't build those before you build the first one. Okay, got to build the big thing in the middle first. So that's why I spent the whole month, well, not a whole month, but I spent one whole video lesson talking about how to build that good, solid breakdown pose, because it's a primary one. It has to be there before I can do these. Okay, it stands to reason if we go ahead and erase this out. If you're going to build a bridge from here to here, and your bridge is this high, okay, well, it makes no sense working on this part of the bridge or this part of the bridge until you have solved this part of the bridge. Because what if you go ahead and start building on this part of the bridge, but you build it this way, and on this part you build it this way? Oh, but in the middle you know you want it this way. Well, you got problems. Okay, that's a non-functioning bridge. You can't do the little stuff before you do the big stuff. That's why I do this. I have from here to here, and this is the big stuff. That's the big breakdown. I call it breakdown 1, my primary breakdown. There's pose 2, and pose 1. Getting from pose 1 to pose 2, I need that breakdown to define everything. Then what I do is I make what I call secondary breakdowns that define how to get from the primary breakdown to the pose, or from the first pose to the primary breakdown. It's all about breaking things down. Breaking down. There you go. It's real simple. Okay? Or, you know, maybe a different way to look at it would be, let's take a look at it in terms of an alphabet. Okay? You have A, and you have, let's say, E. Okay? It's really hard to know what's your halfway point going to be here. Okay? Is your halfway point going to be B? Is it going to be C? Is it going to be D? Well, in terms of just thinking about it, let's just say it's right in the middle. Well, let's say you give an ACE. Now you can go ahead and work these two together. Now you can make B, and now you can make D. Okay? So the order of things that are made, poses first, 1, okay? Then the primary breakdown, which is number 2, and then you can go ahead and you can start working on the secondary breakdowns. Okay, you're trying to get from A to E. C is the middle, B and D. Okay, so that's the order of things. These are the order of things you work on. Number 1, and then number 2, and then number 3. This way you're not chasing your tail, because let's go ahead and take a look at this. I know we're doing a lot of whiteboard time, but it's important to explain this concept. Let's take a look at this idea here. You want to get from here to here, okay? And you want to do it by way of a breakdown here, okay? So we'll go ahead and we're just going to say this is our breakdown, okay? Now you can figure out, well, okay, now I want to figure out what this needs to be here. So that's easy, and that's easy, okay? Now, what happens if you change this? Okay, well, if you change that, now all of a sudden you have a different line here. You've got to do this. Okay, so now if you move the primary one, these have to change. That's why I call this the primary and these secondary. This is a primary breakdown. This is a secondary breakdown. Because if you move the primary breakdown, wherever you move it, if you move it here, if you move it down here, let's say we move it down here, and now we have, you know, this kind of a path of motion. Okay, you can move this primary breakdown anywhere you like it. Okay, but when you do that, these other breakdowns are affected. This is mom, these are children. Wherever mom goes, the children follow. Okay, that's why I call this a primary, because it's important. It's the most important. It defines things the most. And this is a secondary. Now what happens if you leave your breakdown okay, but you change your pose? Uh-oh. Notice what's out of line again? Now let's say we've got this kind of a line of motion. Okay? Now we've changed the pose. Well, this guy's got to move. That's why he's a secondary breakdown. He is completely dependent on all the things around him. A secondary breakdown is one of those things, and you can use them for eases, for fixing arcs, for overlaps, just all kinds of animation solutions. But if you put your work in a hierarchy like this, you understand, okay, I'm going to go ahead and treat this piece of motion right here. It's important to understand, is it something that depends on other things, or is it something that stands on its own? Okay? A primary breakdown does depend on two things. It depends on pose 1 and pose 2. Okay? In that sense, the primary breakdown has to be able to work with pose 1 and pose 2, but it's fairly independent regardless of that, because here, take a look at this again. Here's pose 2, here's pose 1. We can put this primary breakdown pretty much anywhere along this space in between them, and we'll get a system that's going to work. We'll take these guys and throw them up here for a bit. Okay? And then we'll take these secondary guys and move them out of the way. Okay, so anywhere between here and here, okay, this is the computer's linear way. You can put it here, it'll work because you have this kind of a path. You could put it here, you have that kind of path. You can put it right there, you have that kind of a path. Put it right there, you have that kind of path. Pretty much anywhere in between, you can put this primary breakdown, and it defines the nature of the move. You're still starting here, you're still ending here, okay? But this defines which way you get there. How do you get there? So put it anywhere you want. Let's say we'll put it right there, okay? So now we say, okay, this is how we get there. But in the computer world, that's not generally what you're going to get. You're generally going to get this. Straight lines, right? But now we want to make that soft and nice and arced, okay? Let's say we want to get from that straight line to this. Well, now we got to use secondary breakdowns, and that one can go right there, and that one goes right there. And these define how to get from the pose to the primary. They're completely dependent upon two things: the pose and the primary breakdown. If any of one of these changes, this guy no longer works. Okay? Grab him and move him back. If this guy moves, he no longer works. He has to be changed. So I spend a lot of time, as I displayed last month, I spend a lot of time making sure that the relationship between here and here works. Pose, 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 breakdown, pose, pose, breakdown, pose. I spend a lot of time. If you watch VTS43, I'm just thumbing back and forth. I'm scrolling back and forth between those three drawings a lot. Because if I can get those three things working, and they're working good, and they're working solid, then when it comes time for me to do something like this, I know I don't have to change this. I don't really have to move it. I may adjust it or edit it, but in the terms of making a drawing, I don't have to make huge, fantastic, gross changes to it. I just leave it pretty much where it is because I've spent a lot of time solving it. Now I can, with confidence, go in and say, all right, now I'm going to work on this, and now I'm going to work on this. All right, and that's what we're going to spend our time doing this time in this video. Is I'm going to take the time to work on this and this. These are the secondary breakdowns, and their job is to help define how you get from the pose to the primary breakdown, from the primary breakdown to the second pose. If I had not have spent a lot of time putting this where I wanted, then I leave myself with a lot of guesswork. This could be roughly anywhere in this area. Let's say let's say my margin of error, meaning let's say I didn't really tighten it down, but I kind of guessed it's going to be somewhere in this area down here. Well, just imagine that. Imagine I had this entire area right here to work with, and I didn't really nail it down. I really didn't get it tight. If I didn't get that figured out tight, look at all the slop I have. And this thing could be way over here, and this could be way over there. Or if I put it right here, then that's a completely different thing. Or I put it over here, that's a lot of, it's narrowed down, but it's not really figured out. And a lot of times, the tragedy is I see a lot of younger animators make a breakdown, and it's just some sloppy thing just thrown in there wherever, just put it wherever. But it doesn't mean anything, because they haven't figured out how to take that area and really nail it down, like really make it tight. Okay, now if I make that my area of work, now I've only got a little bit of things to go with. Now if all of a sudden I'm making these things and I realize, crud, I got to change my breakdown. Well, if I do this, now all I got to do is maybe change that a little bit. Or if I come here like this, maybe I can only change that a little bit. So I'm going to end up chasing my tail a little bit. Whatever you do to the primary is going to affect the secondary. So if you spend a lot of time making the primary good before you start building any of the secondaries, then you're going to have yourself something really solid so that when you build your secondaries, you're not chasing your tail. You're not saying, well, I hope this works. You'll know that this is pretty tight, and so any changes you make here, because you discover new things, you want to make it stronger, you're going to change these, but you're not going to change it a ton, okay? Okay, so now that we got that long preamble about what the difference between a primary and a secondary breakdown is, at least is how I define them. One little caveat, you don't find too many other people defining breakdowns this way. In fact, I don't know of anybody else who has. This is kind of a system I've come up on my own. So if you ask some other animator, hey, how do you handle primary breakdowns? They might look at you like a dog, like this. Just so you know, okay? It's kind of a Langoism more than anything else. But again, it just helps me kind of figure out how I'm going to do my work. That way you don't look like the fool at the office. Hey, how do you handle your primary breakdowns? Primary what? Okay. All right, so let's take a moment and let's see what we're going to do here. What I'm going to do is I normally work with a bunch of scripts that I wrote for myself that make the job easier, but I realize not everybody has these. And number two, I'm not going to give them out. And it's the reason I don't give them out is not because I don't want people to have them. It's because I don't have the time to support them. And I tried this in the past, a couple of years back. I gave out some tools, and I found that even if you tell people these are free, I don't have any time to do support, I can't do tech support, if you can't figure it out, I'm sorry, I'm not going to help you. People still email me and say, can you help me get this figured out? And then I have to be the bad guy and say, no, I already told you I can't. And they're like, well, gee. So I don't feel like getting into the whole email thing. So anyways, long story short, I write tools to help me in my studio do my job that are in the studio but not out there. So I'm going to work in a way that's a little slower, but is the same concept. So this way you can do it in any program, any way you want, as long as you work in this drawing paradigm. Okay? So first thing I'm going to do is going to come up, I'm going to grab all the controllers here. The first thing I do is take and grab these and just create one extra frame between them. Okay? So, and all these are set to linear. Okay, if I were to do this and use tangents, you can't see the tangents, but if I bring this up here, I could have done the same thing in the dope sheet too. I could, well, I didn't want to do that, but I can move them. I also have keyboard shortcuts that will take the selection and move them over, but it's just a shortcut, so you don't have to sit here and watch me fumble with my mouse. Now, one thing you could do if you wanted to, I know some people do this when they do their blocking, they actually do their blockings, several keys between them. Like they'll do it every 5 keys. So they'll do one on 5, one on 10, okay, or on 6 in this case. 1, 6, 10, whatever. I mean, people work, 4 frames between them or whatever. You can do that too if you like. Whatever way works for you, and then you just set the tangents on all these to be linear. Okay, you can choose tangents, linear, and then there you go. All right, so that way you're getting some things from the computer for free, but as you notice, it's not particularly good stuff for free, but it kind of gets you along the path. I generally don't work that way. I usually work drawings 1, 2, and 3, and then I have my script set, insert a new one, and makes things linear and does all that stuff for me. But this will work. Okay, didn't want to do that. Okay, so I'm just going to move this back so that there's just one extra drawing between them. Okay, and take this guy and move him back so that there's a free one at 2 and there's a free one at 4, and our previous drawings are at 1, 3, and 5. Okay, now as you see, there's a problem here with the head and everything like that poking through. So this is where your secondary breakdown work starts coming in. I need to do some fixes here regarding how how he works getting through the door. So this is where you just start the hard business of getting everything going the way you want it to go. Okay, and what I'll do is, a lot of times is I'll as I always try to do, is I step through these things so I can get a sense of where I want them to go. I'll also use my little drawing tool here to kind of give myself some clues as to where I'm going. And so the head will be like this, and then he comes up here, and so this is the end right there. So I want this primary breakdown, the secondary breakdown, I want the head to be somewhere right in here, right? Because I want to create this nice arc. So I got to find a way to get the head somewhere in that range right there. A couple ways that can happen. Okay. Okay, we can do this. We can do this. Of course, we have to be very mindful of the head poking through the door. We don't want that to happen. Okay, one other thing I really should do to make walking through all this easier, because I'm using these the keyboard shortcuts to jump from keyframe to keyframe. I'm just going to take every controller and just set a key on it right here on frame 2, so that way no matter what I select now, it's supposed to keep everything keyed. Okay, come here and set a keyframe. Okay. So then, now that everything has a key on it, now I can kind of walk my way through it, because it's important for me to be able to walk my way through it with the keyboard shortcuts, because it's like rolling your drawings as a traditional animator. So now what I need to do, the thing I'm mostly worried about are the hips and the head. If I can get the hips and the head working, then I'm pretty good. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to take another color here, and I'm going to work out kind of where the hips are. Okay. And I really want to kind of nail that just the right way. So the hips kind of come down and then stop. All right, so they need to come down somewhere in that halfway range right there. And this particular scene, hips are one of those things where sometimes a scene, it's really important for how the hips work, and sometimes in other ones it's just not so important. What I'm doing here is Maya has this little feature where you can hold down the Alt key and use the arrow keys to kind of nudge things around on the screen, and I do that a fair amount because it's easier than grabbing it and moving it around. As long as I got my hands on the keyboard, it works. Okay, so I'm focusing mainly on the hips right here, because if I can get the hips working and I'm pretty happy with them, then I know that I can work on the head stuff independent of that and be okay. Okay, so now that I know that that's working all right, I'm going to take a look at the curve here of the body, like this, okay? And so somewhere in here, we want the head to be this yellow thing, so we need some way to kind of curve out from this. And I know it's a lot of junk on the screen, but it helps to really know how you want to handle a given kind of option right here. So I'm going to go ahead and erase all this stuff. One way you can kind of get the head lower, of course, is by rotating the hips back and forth. So it's really just this thing about trying to find the sweet spot to get the head down. And so we got right there, and got right here, and so we want it somewhere in the middle there. Okay, we like where the hips are at, so now we have to do the rest of the work with these controllers if we can. So I'm going to try and grab something. There's these IK spine things, which I generally don't use much, but if I have to, I will. And let me choose object mode and kind of come over here, come down a bit. Now the important thing is, it doesn't matter if he's poking through the door as long as we don't see him poking through the door. So it's one of those things where he can poke through the door, but we've got to do it in a way that it doesn't look terribly obvious. Okay. The other thing we can do to help ourselves is we can take a look at what the door is doing itself. Now the door is only going to be, halfway between here and here. Okay, on its way out. Now the door is one of those things where when I selected his entire body, I forgot to select the door as well and move those keys. So I'm going to move them out so that they line up with so that they correspond with where they were before. So now that tells me what I need to do with the door here. So I'm going to set a key on that, and I want to make it more like this one. One way you could do that is bring up your graph editor, and you just go ahead, and since this is one controller here, just grab that guy and just move it up. Okay. So that way the door is it's almost halfway open. You see this is the way the door works. And one thing I can do even here is I can push that door up a little bit more. Now I got to be careful that I don't pull it through his foot here. It's really, really close. We can hide it. We can show it poking through as long as it doesn't look like it's poking through from our range. Okay, if you look back in this way, you see, his toe is jammed in the door. Oops. But when you go back to the camera view, put my head back where it was, you don't really see it there. So sometimes you can get too caught up worrying about penetration stuff. You gotta be mindful of it, but you don't have to be slavish about it and slavish in the sense that you're always bowing to the wills and wishes of penetration on these things. Okay, so by opening the door up a little bit more on this particular key, I'm able to give myself just a little bit more room to work with. Okay, and I can also do some things here with the hand, so that what I'm doing here is I'm fixing my primary breakdown. Remember what I talked about? You fix the primary breakdown. Because as you start to do things, you start to realize one influences the other, and you want to be able to work with them together. So it's not like you do something and it's solid and you never touch it again. It's you do something and it's pretty close. I mean, it's as close as you know how to get it. You can't think of any other way to make it better. But then as you start working on the things around it, it's like, whoop, when this is going to adjust to that, whoop, it's going to adjust to that. It's something you got to be prepared to deal with, and that's fine. There's no problem with that at all. So going back to here where we were, I still want to get this head down in a better place. This rig allows me to actually move the head. So if I wanted to, but I don't want to do all the work with just the head. Okay. We'll use some of this body a little bit more. Okay. And if necessary, I'll adjust the hips a little bit. Okay, this is the tricky stuff. You're like, man, this isn't exactly easy. No, it's not. But that's why this stuff is called animation, because it actually takes a little bit of work. And again, the key here is to try and find something that works from the camera view. Now I'm going to spend a fair amount of time here trying to get this one thing to work, but okay, that's looking a little bit better from that view. How's it look from this view? Better. Okay, see that? It's getting there, but it's a straight line. If we draw this, his head's there, and his head is there, and then his head is there. So we're getting there, but it's just a straight line. See that? We don't want that. We want a little bit of an arc. So we come back here, and we got to find a way to just kind of cheat this down. So I'm going to come over here and grab some things. I'm already pushing this pretty far, so one thing I can do is I can take this, it's a cute little trick, rotate it back, and then rotate this guy forward. Okay, by doing that, we actually make his head lower. But just think about it. I mean, we go ahead and draw it out. If you have something like this, and something like this, and then a head, if you were to actually take this very thing right here, and rotate it back from here, about the same height, and then you take this guy here and then rotate it forward, where's the head end up? Head ends up down here. Okay, so you can get things down without necessarily using a translate. You can just use rotate to kind of fold it in on itself. Okay, so you can rotate the hips back and then rotate the chest forward, and that lowers the head. It's just a little something comes in real handy. And you know what the other good thing about it is it keeps the body feeling loose when you do that. So I'm trying to do a little bit of something like that to just get the head down a little bit. Okay, so I'm creating some problems here with the hips though, because they're coming here and then they're kind of going back, so I need to do something. I need to get even more extreme with this. Okay, the hips are feeling a little bit better. It's dropping down, but it's still just a little bit goofy. And one thing you can do is, if you wanted to, you could go ahead and track the little rotation moment on the hips, and that comes in handy sometimes, where if I want I can do this and then I can just kind of move that there, so I can kind of get it working. Again, it's about this feeding into that. Alright, so what does that mean for my head? That means my head is still fairly linear. When it comes down, it's still making just a straight line. And I know that the hips are working about as well as they can, so whatever I do to get the head down there, now I need to do it a different way. Okay, he's kind of poking through the door, but not quite. So one way I can kind of cheat the head down is to rotate him like this. Okay, and I can really rotate that, and that rotating collapse thing works on all axes. Okay, notice I'm lowering the head, but I'm not really messing with the position of the hips. All I'm doing is just collapsing in on himself. Now of course this looks really, really bad from this view, but the idea is to try and make shapes move. Okay, whenever you're animating something, it's real easy to get caught up in the idea of, you know, body parts in motion, but it's more about shapes. Okay, now I'm not really a big fan of this shape right here, of how it's translating right there. In fact, all that rotating on the hips is really, it's not working. And the thing is, I mean, you're going to find when I'm animating this stuff for these videos, I haven't solved this stuff out yet. Okay, it's not like I've figured all this out and I'm just recreating it for you. I'm figuring it out on the fly, because it's no good for you if I sit here and practice this and get it all perfect and just show you how it works after I've already figured it out. I mean, it's important to know that this stuff takes work. Okay, that's better. Okay, now the good thing about this is, this guy right here, his transparency could be 0. Okay, and so the first frame we'd see of him is that. I know that I'm looking at him back here as if, you know, as if his transparency of the door is such that you can see through it. And I did that when I set it up, just to try and get a sense of where he's coming from and where he's going to. And the one thing that I'm looking at is I'm pretty much gonna have to do something a little bit more extreme with this hip to kind of get him up out of the way, so that when he comes down, that gives me some room to work with here. Okay, the head is still fairly linear. If we take a look at it from here, and comes down here, and then it goes here. Okay, it's got a little bit of a curve to it, but it would be really nice if we can just get that head down a little bit. Now the question is, can I just do it by moving the head, since the rest of his body is just kind of hidden? Yeah, probably. So now that's getting the head more like this. Alright, and that's closer to what I want. Okay, and I'm doing some things here where that shape of the hip coming in through here isn't super offensive, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to use this little squash and stretch controller right here to kind of clean up that silhouette. Okay, this junk out here wasn't liking it too much, so I use these little squash and stretch controllers mainly to create the kinds of silhouettes that I want. And I'm watching not how the knee moves, but just how the shapes translate into the space. And to do that, a lot of times I'll step through it very quickly. Alright. Okay, so we're pretty good on that. The door is pretty good, the head's finally in shape. You can go ahead and get this hand kind of lined up a little bit better on the door here. can maybe do some things with the elbow here. We really don't even see the elbow, but we can do this where we can see the elbow. Alright, you're not going to really see it back there, so it doesn't matter, but for the one frame it helps define what's happening. Alright, and here we can move it around, but it doesn't really make any difference. We talked about that when we set up the poses in a few videos back. Okay, so there's your secondary breakdown. You could use that as a kind of ease, and that's really more about the timing, but it's important for me to kind of get the shapes I want and the drawings I want. I need this breakdown to define what's going on in the scene, and I'm really liking that. Okay, so I'm just gonna hit save because, dude, I just want to save it. Alright, let's see if we can make the next one be a little bit easier. This one will be easier because it's not as complex coming from behind that door. Our head is here, okay, and ends up here, and we go back here. It's you know, definitely down, and then here it's up and kind of across. Okay, so if you take a look at these two, you got one down here like this, you got one up here like this. So you're gonna unroll it. It's gonna unroll. So you're gonna, all three axes are gonna be at work here. What I want to try and do is kind of hit the crown of the head, and then from that rotate out the chin. What I mean is I want the head to kind of hit its terminus here, and then roll up underneath it. It's just kind of a fun way to do things. So it's not like he's hitting a spot, but it's almost like he does this, and instead of the pivot being from back down here behind the head where it's built in the rig, we kind of create an imaginary pivot for the head, so that when it gets here, instead of rotating the head where the top kind of goes, that actually messes up the shape of the shape. Okay, and that's where you get into trouble if you think in terms of body parts. You can't think in terms of body parts. You think in terms of body parts, you do this and then you do this, then the top of the head's rotating, it's messing up your silhouette, and it kind of boils the silhouette. You know, it's all moving around and it doesn't have any consistency. But if you do something like this, where you get the head like this into position, and then you kind of work off of the idea that this right here is where you want to hold from for the top of the head. Now what you can do is you can do something like this, and the head will swing, but it swings as if it's from this position here instead of down underneath. So it's like this. Now that's pretty extreme. You're generally going to also get some kind of a rise in the body as well when it happens. So this will actually be, you know, it'll be up higher. So comes from here to here. Now of course it's moving. We see the top is here and the top is here, but we want the sense that the chin is swinging out more than anything else. So to do that, again, what I need to do is take and select everything and the door, go to frame 4, and just set a key on it, so I'm just kind of borrowing what the computer's given me here. Okay, so that way I can step through things and really get a sense of what's going on here. Now what I want to do is I don't want this to be all the same. I don't want, because okay, one sentence at a time. What I had is I had my breakdown here at frame 3 and I had my pose at frame 5. I just set a key on frame 4. Okay, that is now 50% of the change for all the controllers between here and here. But I don't want 50%. It's boring. Okay, I want some parts, and I don't want all of it to be 25% or 75%. I want different parts to be different percentages. That way you get good organic overlaps and stuff like that. So right now what I have is what the computer gave me, which is the halfway value between what was at 3 and 5 for every controller. Okay, the easiest way to describe that in a way that could make sense is you can go ahead and open up our graph editor, and you'll see it right here at frame 4 for any controller you wish, or any, go ahead and choose view auto frame right there. It's just a halfway point. Okay, it's just setting a key, There's no change in the values. Doesn't matter which attribute you choose. All I'm doing is I'm just saying, okay, computer, give me what you got. Okay, and that's what I'm working with. Whether or not that's useful or not, that's just where we're at. Okay, I save that so that it gives me something to work with. So when I go rolling through these things, I can step through it the way I'm used to stepping through it. Okay, the thing I want to do here is I want the hips to be most of the way there. So what I'm going to do is going to use my little keyboard shortcut that makes it like the next key. So like the hips are almost all the way done. Okay, and this guy right here, I want him to do the same thing. At frame 4, I want the hips to be pretty much almost all the way there. I want a stable platform for the hips so that everything else kind of goes from that position. Okay, so once the hips get down here, it's really just about getting them not necessarily locked in place, because I'm going to step this back just a little bit and then forward. I want them to be alive, but I don't want a lot of motion there. I want most of the motion to be happening in the head. Okay, the same thing with these controllers right here with the upper body parts. I'm going to go ahead and get them a little bit closer to the next one. When I do that, I think I described this in the previous video, but I have a key here at 3 and a key here at 5. Okay, and then I have this thing that here was at 4, and that's what I was just showing you in the graph editor. Okay, so we have this sort of thing going on. What my keyboard shortcut does is it makes it more like this one or more like this one. Okay, so let's control this one. And if you're in the APT students get these scripts because I can support 10 people at a time, not 100 or 1,000. Okay, so my keyboard shortcuts, you don't see me doing it in the graph editor, but really all it's doing is this or this. Wow, that was a surprising little piece of information. Okay, so I had a little bit of a crash there with my little drawing tool. Relied on it a little too much. Still a great tool. Annotate Pro, annotatepro.com. $20. Best $20 you'll ever spend as a digital animator, guaranteed. Okay. All right. So here we were talking about this, where these different tools. I could show you something like take this right here, graph editor. I could just select these, one channel at a time, and move them up or down or do whatever I want with them. But what I do is my little keyboard shortcut does that for me automatically. Okay, it's a cheap little piece of code. I'm not doing anything magical or anything like that. All I'm doing is I'm just doing something automatically that you could do by hand. Okay, so all I'm doing is just kind of showing you that when I do some kind of keyboard shortcut, it's not magic, it's just time saving. That's all. Alright, and again, those are the kinds of tools. I'll go ahead and I hand those out to the APT students because I can handle 10 people asking me questions how to use something a lot better than I can handle 1,000. Alright, so getting back to what I wanted to do with the head, I'm going to take a moment here and I'm going to mark out where the head's kind of doing its thing. Right there. Alright, so somewhere in here I want to do something with the head. Where it's kind of coming, it continues that arc. Remember, I wanted that arc, this nice arc to it, but I still want that sense where it's rotating. Kind of hits and then rotates the chin forward, which is kind of what I got right here. Okay. Now what I want to do is just make sure that this little change right here with the eyes doesn't pop too much, because it's not just about changing the Z rotation in a good pleasing way, but it's also about the Y rotation and the X rotation. So right here what I want to do is just really take a look at how the top of the head's kind of making its shape as well, its arc. And you can actually do this. I mean, these are the kinds of silly things I'll do. I'll actually go and I'll draw, you know, the top of the head, just a little tick for the top of the head to see how it's going and see if it's creating the kinds of shapes that I want. Okay? So you see, it's not just about tracking rotation points, but it's all kinds of things. Okay? I could even, seeing this, it's just a little too linear right in through here, so what I might do is just try and cheat the head down a little bit just to create just a little smoother arc here. Happy clouds. Sometimes I feel like Bob Ross when I talk to you guys. Okay, so there's my breakdown. What I want to do is maybe just nudge it back a little bit. Okay, so I'm creating a nice pleasing arc for the top of the head. So now what I'll do is I'll go through and I'll track something like the nose, okay, just to see if it's got the same kind of pleasing arc to it. Let's see here. The nose would be somewhere right around there, and then right around there, and right around there, and then right around there, and you see that the nose also makes a nice, very pleasing arc. Okay, and then one last thing, if I want to get real particular, is I can go ahead and track the chin. So right below there, kind of again, chin somewhere right about there, chin somewhere right around there, chin somewhere right around there, and right around there. So again, it's kind of pleasing, but it's a little flat right in through here. See this? What would be nice is if it dipped down just a little bit more on each of these spots. So what I'm going to do is use this little jaw controller to kind of pull it down a little bit there. And it's really just about creating shapes that flow nicely through the space. Okay? And I can even do the same thing here with the head if I wanted to. You know, if I wanted to move this down, but I wanted the top of the head to be good, I'd do this. But I don't really want to do that. I like the idea of squashing the head through the middle of a move and then extending it at the end so that you get this kind of a shape. You start with a circle, it's squashed in the middle, and then stretched out at the end, and then a circle at the end. Okay, so you kind of create this squash, stretch, elasticity. Okay. Okay, and one other thing I could do with this is, before I settle on it, do something with this elbow here. I want to experiment with the idea of what this would look like if this elbow were really high and then kind of settled in. Okay, and then also this shoulder. What if this shoulder were way up here? Just trying to create some interesting shapes. I don't like how much this arm is changing because it's going from this to this, and it's just too much of a move right there. So I like it moving, but not that much. So what I'm going to do is just grab our little thing right there and just kind of pull it down a little bit. There, that's better. It's still got some change happening there, but it's not like, it's not too drastic so that it really calls attention to itself. Okay, and take this guy right here, and let's see, he doesn't have any stretch for his hand, so what I could do is just kind of pull that down, just kind of soften that line a little bit on that pose. And do the same here. I like things moving, good shapes changing, but I don't want them to change so much that they become really so drastic. And want to keep some good snap here from 4 to 5. Really want some good snap there. So even though the head and everything's been tracking pretty nice, I might push it just a little bit more. So there's a bit more snap to it. And one other way I might get a little more snap is to go ahead and take this squash and stretch controller and just kind of push it out here so it's almost all the way done with its move. Okay, so we're starting to get everything built in pretty good. And take this guy and take a transparency down to nothing. And so what do we have? Turn off our key. Key this thing down so that there's no transparency at all. Okay. So there you go. As we step through it, we're going to start to see, how you can see the shapes in motion. And you see how I could not have built 2 and 4 if I did not know what 3 was. I could not build 3 until I had figured out 1 and 5. Okay, 1, if you see it back here, and 5 is right there. So that's the order I work in building up my movement. And I haven't gotten around to timing stuff yet, but we'll get there, okay? The idea here is you work in order. It's like building a house. You put in the foundation. So that's 1 and 5, okay? And then you put in the main load-bearing wall, okay? That's 3. Then you start putting up other walls. That's 2 and 4, okay? So it's about building things with sense of structure and form. 1 and 5 were important. Once I figured out 1 and 5, I could build 3. So now 1, 3, and 5 were done. Now I can work on 2 because 2 gets you from 1 to 2 to 3. And I can work on 4 because that gets you from 3 to 4 to 5. Okay? So now I have my 2 poses, my primary breakdown, and I have these secondary breakdowns that I've built. Okay? Now one thing I haven't done yet is I haven't really done anything with the face right here. And so I'm just going to go ahead and work on that. I want the eyes to be closed pretty much right to the end. I'm going to take this, squish it down, squish it down. And I got to remember that he says, what? What do you want? So I'm trying to build a little bit of a W here, okay? You're thinking, golly, you think about that stuff? Yeah, I think about that stuff. I think about where he's at in the scene and what kind of shapes are necessary for that drawing. It's just good stuff, You want to be... Here we go. So there's kind of a wha for what do you want. So he comes in here. So when he says, what do you want, there's a W right there to work with. Okay? And then this right here. All right. Again, just doing little tweaks. So you can kind of feel that wah right there. And again, the head's, it's like the rotation is happening from the top of the head. See that? How the chin's whipping forward? And that's not a rigging thing. That's an animator thing. So don't let the rig define how you make things move. I mean, the rig defines things to a point, but there comes a point where, okay, you make it do what you want it to do, okay? And that's why working in this drawing method is really cool, because you're forcing the drawings to be what you want them to be, okay? And you're And by building in enough of them, you know, the secondary breakdowns here really help me know that I'm not doing things in a way that's really super violating what the rig wants to do. So I take a look at it. I mean, that is not a curve that is particularly difficult for the computer to solve. If you take a look at each of these curves, okay, they're not. You know, this one's a little bit crazy, but that's translate what minus 0.18. I mean, it's not that much of a difference. We're probably gonna end up polishing that right out. This one we will keep. This one we'll probably keep. That we might just polish that right out. But the rotates, that's a simple curve. These are curves that are very friendly, you know, motion curves. This is, you know, this really, it just represents math, okay? This is the computer's way of saying, okay, this motion is represented mathematically by this curve. What you end up with trouble sometimes is when you try to make the puppet do things that the math doesn't like, okay? Now, if you have a motion curve that looks like this, okay, for a simple move, you might find yourself having a hard time cleaning that up, you know, because as you spread this out, how it gets from here to here could be very, very goofy. All right, you're going to find yourself fighting a lot of things. So does that mean you try and make things work so that the curves always look pretty? Sometimes you can't, but a lot of times if you're careful about it, you can. So every now and then just check things like this and just, you know, see that if, you know, it's not majorly out of whack. This is not majorly out of whack. It's pretty good stuff overall. Okay. The one that will probably be the craziest is this one right here. Pretty good there. It's pretty good there. Pretty good there. Rotates okay-ish. This rotate is a little weird. This rotates very weird. And this is one, the rotate Z on this is probably going to be the one we're going to have the most trouble with. Keep that in mind as you watch videos down the road as we start getting the cleaning up and the post-blocking cleanup phase and things like that. You're going to start to see me probably struggle with the rotate Z on this hip. Okay, but we're going to find a way through it. We're not going to worry about that right now. All right, so there we are. We have built our 2 secondary breakdowns, and what I could do is very, very quickly here just throw in one more quick drawing because I wanted him to settle. Okay, if you remember from the clip. So just kind of want him to settle here. Forward and down a bit. Okay, so I'm not liking that too much. So what I'll do is just kind of take it back here. Let's see. Okay, step through it. Don't like the rotating going on there, so I'm going to go like this. And I'm going to do that counter rotate thing to settle. Yeah, I like that better. So get this to kind of rotate down. Alright, so again, rotate this back a bit. Rotate this a bit forward. Okay, and then the head. Something like that. What do you want? That's pretty extreme right there, and I'll probably find a way to make that a little bit less extreme. This could be a big extension forward and then settle back. Okay. Alright, so let's do something like this. I think he's dropping just a little bit too much right there. So just use a various combination of these things. Take the head. I'm just going to go ahead and copy that keyframe back because I think I moved it too far before. Alright, take this guy right here. It's really about the eyes. I want the path of the eyes to work. So I'll play around with some, as long as the hips feel alive, I'm not going to worry about it, but I do think that they're rotating too much right there. It does feel kind of pelvic thrusty, doesn't it? So that's going to be, hold down the E key, choose gimbal, that's going to be the X channel. So what I'll do is I'll just use the rotate X, and I'm just going to pull this back up towards this where it was, so that the rotate X isn't quite as much as it was. Okay, so what that's letting me do, take this back to local here. It kind of isolates that shape right there because there was just too much noise in the shape down here when it was going from 5 to 6. It was too much. Okay, so what I wanted to do is I still want the head to drop, but I didn't like what I was doing with the hips. So I started to go in a direction. I was like, no, I don't like that. So I still have the head dropping too much. I mean, the head's going from here, and it's going down quite a bit. I mean, it's going all the way down to, you know, right about there. And I want to kind of split that difference. I want to kind of maybe do halfway. All right, so I've got to find a way to do that a little bit less. Well, one way to do that is just, you know, use these little controllers to do their job. Okay. And then the head, there, that's what we wanted, that kind of counter rotate down and up sort of thing. Okay, that's what we're after, where the chest goes forward and the head kind of goes back. Okay, so what we've got here is the hips are kind of going down, just a little bit too far. So take a look at our translate Y. Kind of just pull that up a bit, kind of quiet that noise down right there in the hips. It's okay if it moves a little bit. We want it to be alive, but we didn't want to draw attention to itself. We want the major change to be up here near the eyes, but we didn't want it to be so much that it's hard to track. Okay, and this guy right here, it comes forward and then settles down a little bit. And the head, maybe just a little bit more right here. Okay, that might have been too much, so I'm just going to undo that. Undo. There we go. All right. Then we take take the mouth. All right. I'm trying to create that want. Trying to keep from doing, you know, perfectly straight mouths. I like mouths that have a bit of a curve to them. Pardon me. You know, I don't like mouths that go straight across. I want something that's got a little shape, a little bit of organic flow to it. So I'm going to take a little bit of time here to build something that's got a little bit of a flow to it. All right. And what I could do is just drag that a little bit. All right. And then this up like so. And it's kind of tricky. The facial controls on this are pretty fun, but they're kind of tricky too. So there we go. Okay. And then do something like this. A little bit bigger there. Make the eyes just a little bit more desperate. And can we rotate the eye? No. That's too bad. Alright. And maybe do something like this where he's just, now he's starting to be a little more like, not just cheesed off, but maybe a little bit like, what are you doing? What do you want? Just leave me alone. But that's too much of a change. Okay, so I think what I'll do is I'll kind of take it back to where it was. I think right here what I'll do is I'll stretch this out a little bit so that this is more of a stretch pose. Okay, it's still asymmetrical, but I definitely want a stretch and a squash at the end. So I want to treat this one like a stretch, okay, in pretty much every way. And then I want the squash to be felt as too. So it's going squash, stretch, squash. And to do that, use the scale of the eyes to kind of do that. See that? And use the brows as well. Okay, so right here we can get the brows up quite a bit. And kind of play with that. There we go. Okay. There we go. What do you want? Not too thrilled with this though. Just how much it's kind of, it feels a little fat right here. Feels a little John McCain jowl right there. Okay. But it's a limitation of the rig. We'll take it. Okay, so you compare me just stepping through these drawings. Compare that to the little animatic that we made, and you'll see that it's working okay. There's a little bit of a noise right there with the knee, but we'll fix that next time when we get into post blocking cleanup. One of the things we could do, we could probably do it right now. Isn't that the way it is with animators? I'll just do it right now. We'll take this ball and we'll set it down to, well, maybe 0.1 or something. No. Try and find a way to keep that try and keep it still so it doesn't pop so much. There we go. It can pop a little bit, but I don't want to draw attention to itself. So there it's not moving at all, and the difference was 0.26. You know, if you look over here, 0.26, 0.24. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to split the difference. Call it 0.25. So it moves a little bit, so it stays alive, but it's not calling attention to itself. All right, and it's little things like that hey man, you can fix it now in the drawing stage, or you can wait till you see it later on in Play Blasts. But by the time you get that far down the road, you know, by taking 13 seconds now to do it, I just probably saved myself an hour's worth of headache, or maybe not an hour, but at least 5 to 10 minutes worth of headache down the road when I start looking at that at Play Blast. Like, why is that knee popping? Well, I can fix it right now. Okay? So there you go. Just stepping through this quite a bit. And it's looking pretty solid. Okay, we got our secondary breakdowns built. We even have this kind of finish out pose, I guess you would call it. That would be an extreme, that would be a pose. Okay, if I'm talking classic 2D animator, that's an extreme, that's a pose, because you would hold that. Okay, so there you go. Alright, so that's what we got this month, and we'll go ahead and we're going to pick it up from here. We'll probably fill in a few more little things here and there if we need to, but I think this one is feeling pretty solid as is. The number of drawings we have is pretty sparse. We've only got 6, but for the kind of move that this is, I'm not sure it needs any more. So what we'll do is we'll start getting into timing this out and then filling in the rest and just kind of going from there. Again, we're just animating, okay? Sorry if it didn't flow real well. Again, like I told you, I don't practice this stuff and then get it all figured out for you and just do everything perfect and nice. I'm figuring it out as you watch me. I think that's far more instructive for you to see my struggles, see me go down a dead end and say, oop, that's not going to work, back up, I think it's it's animating in the raw. So hopefully that's helpful to you guys. Hopefully you find that useful and interesting. If you don't, well, send me an email and we'll see what we can do about it. Okay? But yeah, man.
There you go, man. Lots of stuff. Where do we go from here? Next month, like I mentioned in the previous part of the video, we're going to go ahead and get moving on doing some timing, some spreading some things out, maybe fill in a few more drawings here and there, but generally it's time to kind of move off of this stage and into something else. And then if you got a question like, hey, where are we going after this when he's done animating this scene? Dude, there's another scene. We'll just animate a different one. We'll just do something with a little more complicated action. We're going to have all kinds of stuff. We're going to have things with walks. We're going to have things with more, two character sort of thing. We're going to have dialogue. We're going to have cartoony. We're going to have it all, man. By the time this is all said and done, we're going to have a humongous library of stuff that hopefully will be pretty cool to look at, and hopefully you'll learn a lot from. So till next month, you guys be good. Behave yourselves, okay? Keep an eye out on your stock portfolios. Oh, has that been crazy these days? And until then, yeah, be good.